This is Brice Burge, host of Your Soccer Passport. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
How's it going, everybody?
Hey guys,
This is Keith.
and Katie from Coffee with Keith and Katie on Public House Media.
Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
When you're done listening to this show, I hope you'll come check out our show, Coffee with Keith and Katie. A new episode comes out every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock.
Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
The latest headlines.
The Houston Astros, the defending World Series champions, got better adding Garrett Cole.
The insightful interviews.
Rick Saratella, NFL Draft Bible. With how much emphasis is put on the position, yet how many over the last couple of years we've had questions. Why do we put such an emphasis on drafting a quarterback number one overall?
The bottom line is there's not enough good quarterbacks to go around. And I think with the new CBA, it's really a low-risk gamble now. If you look at the playoff teams, the common denominator, good quarterback play.
The hottest takes.
I think the guy to blame is the one guy who hasn't left yet. I think Russell Westbrook is one of the bigger problems in Oklahoma City.
Can all be found on Press Row.
Broadcasting is part of the Public House Media Network.
Here's your host,
It doesn't matter what your name is.
Christian Heimel.
What is up, everybody? Welcome on Press Row on this Thursday, May 9th, 2019. Christian Heimel here with you, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us. Sorry we missed last week. Busy week in the professional world and the personal world, so we took a little bit of R&R there to relish it, savor it, and enjoy it. But we are back. We are ready to go, and we got an exciting show for you guys today. It's not often we do this. As you all know, I'm not a huge soccer guy, but when certain things happen, especially with my team, the Liverpool Reds, happen, we're going to talk about it. So Brice Burge of Your Soccer Passports, Public House Media's own Brice Burge, is going to join us. We're going to talk the Champions League final, Liverpool's incredible comeback to win on aggregate, the great semifinal between Tottenham and Ajax. So we're excited about it. It's going to be a great show today. We're really excited to have it. Your listener questions, as always, are going to be available. Don't forget, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Google, Spreaker.com, as well as Apple Podcasts and Google Play. You can find us on publichousemedia.org, iHeartRadio, all those wonderful things as well. And you can check out the show on social media, Twitter and Instagram handles at PressRowPHM. You can email the show if you'd like, PressRowPHM@gmail.com. And, of course, you can always find us on Facebook at PressRow Podcast Public House Media. Really excited to get this show started for you guys. I want to touch on one thing, and again, I talk about it almost every single year. I feel like I go crazy with this, but as much as I love the sport of baseball, and as much as baseball is everything for me, there is no better time of year than Stanley Cup playoffs. These playoffs have been amazing, and now you've got what is a really cool setting here. I don't know how many of you guys have seen it, how much you've been following along with it, but oh man, is this really, really cool to see the Boston Bruins playing the way that they are and the Carolina Hurricanes meeting in the Stanley Cup semifinals in the Eastern Conference is going to be really, really exciting. And then, of course, when you saw what happened with the St. Louis Blues and the Dallas Stars in Game 7, that was even crazier, and we have an exciting Western Conference Finals as well. But the thing that's great about this stuff, and what I love, and this is what hockey has that nobody else does, hockey has the constant drama. It's one of those beautiful things where when you look at how the sport comes together, the energy that it's played, the pace of which it is played, the physicality of which it is played, it is everything that we love about football and basketball. There's always something happening. But with the actual finite split-second decision that boxing, MMA, and soccer can have, because as we saw in Game 7 between the Blues and the Stars, double overtime, it can happen that quick, and it can be over with. And that's what makes it so perfect, and the Stanley Cup playoffs offer that. I know in the regular season they go to a shootout, and trust me, I love the shootout. I actually really do. I don't care what anybody says. I love the Olympic format where you just keep going until you can't go anymore. But the Stanley Cup playoffs, where you just keep playing overtimes until someone finally scores, the adrenaline rush that comes with that is incredible. I remember 2013, I was in Chicago during the Western Conference Finals with the Chicago Blackhawks. We're going through their run, and it was just insane to watch what happened there, to sit in a bar. I remember I was sitting in Mother Hubbard's in Chicago, which, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go, by all means, go check it out and watch it there, because it was unbelievable in the Western Conference Finals to watch them. It was so much fun to see. Double overtime. It was great to watch them and the Kings play in 2013. So that was a lot of fun. And again, it's the finite decision. It's the fact that it can happen. Every hit post, every check, every turnover, it just puts that excitement level up another notch, and you can't beat that anywhere. There are certain sports that have different things that are really, really fun. Don't get me wrong. Basketball with the last-second buzzer beater. You look at a number of other things. It's really, really exciting and fun, but hockey has the best combination, and its playoffs are the best combination you could possibly ask for. There's a reason why. I don't care what anybody says. Hockey has the greatest playoff system in the world. It's so exciting. It's so much fun. I'm not a huge fan of the seeding, but I don't really care because, again, you get these kind of exciting atmospheres where it can end so quickly, yet the pace of it, the actual play of it is so entertaining, so much fun. You never know what's going to happen, and that's what makes hockey so great. That's what makes the Stanley Cup playoffs so damn exciting and so much fun. I cannot wait for the conference championship, for conference finals. I cannot wait for the Stanley Cup finals. It is going to be crazy. I'm really excited. I told you guys a couple weeks ago, I think the Bruins end up winning this whole thing. But to watch the Hurricanes, living in North Carolina now and seeing how excited people get finally for their Hurricanes is really cool. Great young talent there. Obviously, Rob Brindamore as head coach has made this a lot more fun for them. You look at what the Bruins have been able to do. Their physicality that they have played with is incredible to watch. It's going to be a lot of fun. I love the Blues story and the fact that Gloria is so exciting for them, and it's getting played everywhere. And a radio station in St. Louis played Gloria for an entire day after they won in Game 7. Those kind of things can only happen in the NHL playoffs, and that's what makes it so much fun. I hope you guys are enjoying it. If you're not a hockey fan, tune into one game in the playoffs, and you'll be hooked. It doesn't matter, but watch one hockey game in the playoffs. You'll be absolutely hooked. Cannot wait. So excited for all of it, and I hope you guys are as well. When we come back, we'll transition over to another championship. The UEFA Champions League final is coming up in just a little bit. We're going to talk with Brice Burge of Public House Media's own podcast, Your Soccer Passport. We're going to talk to him in a little bit about that and about just kind of what to expect out of this. And if you haven't been paying attention, why maybe you probably should. Your listener questions as well are coming up. You're on Press Row, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network.
Want to be part of the show? Go to Facebook and search Press Row Podcast Public House Media, or find us on Twitter and Instagram at Press Row PHM. You can also email the program, pressrowphm@gmail.com.
This is Brice Burge, host of Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. After this episode, come join us on a trip around the soccer world as we discuss club and country every Tuesday. Stamp Your Soccer Passport by subscribing on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your Public House Media podcasts. And thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Press Row with Christian Heimel, a Public House Media podcast.
Walk on, with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone.
It's a song you won't often hear on Press Row, considering we very rarely talk soccer, but if we are going to, you know it's going to include You'll Never Walk Alone and My Liverpool Reds, and so we're excited to talk Champions League final, an insane couple of Champions League semifinals for those of you who got a chance to watch yesterday, the incredible comeback with Tottenham, and now setting up an exciting Champions League final. We don't talk soccer a lot here, but when we do, we always try to bring on Brice Burge of Public House Media's own Brice Burge, and of course Your Soccer Passport, which you can hear every Wednesday here on Public House Media. Brice, first off, thanks for hopping on the show. And secondly, holy Champions League semifinals, Batman.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a good way to phrase it. Some of the words that I used were probably not as wholesome, but it was a ridiculous format when you look at what needed to happen in these two games. And the first game was a little bit more straightforward when you look at the way the legs come up. That second leg in the Liverpool matchup, Liverpool just had to score early and score often, which they were able to do. But what was different about this one was that with no Mo Salah, you weren't really sure how they were going to balance that out. Mm-hmm. And I think that really played into their favor, because then it was just like it was a complete team effort. Stuff that you kind of saw of good soccer teams in the past, or kind of like a little bit of like how Croatia did some things in the World Cup last year, or like a Switzerland or a Denmark have done things in the World Cup in the past. But now Liverpool did the exact same thing, and they got on the board early. They just completely bull rushed that first 7 minutes against Barcelona. They didn't know what happened, and it allowed Origi to just kind of get that first shot on a rebound. It was a very hockey type goal in soccer, where you just you get so far out, the goalie can't redirect the shot where he needs to put it in a safe place, and he gets that goal. Things kind of calmed down because Barcelona started stepping up a little bit. Suarez started playing his dirty stuff, but eventually in that second half, 54, 56 minutes, bang, bang, you're now tied 3-3 on aggregate. And eventually Origi comes back up to get that winning goal. And it was just a ridiculous format for Liverpool to make it to this point at this point.
Before we get into Tottenham and what happened there, because a lot of people are going to get, for those who don't follow soccer, are going to get a little confused as to why Tottenham is able to tie total 3-3 and yet still advance. We'll get into that in a minute, but for fans of soccer here in the United States, and maybe not true soccer fans, but they'll watch Premier League, you see three teams here that a lot of folks know in Tottenham, Liverpool, and of course Barcelona. Kind of explain what the Champions League actually is if you don't maybe watch Champions League the way you kind of watch Premier League.
So there's not a lot of really good comparisons to anything in United States athletics that I can think of, with the exception of maybe Tier 2 and Tier 3 hockey juniors.
Okay.
In terms of what a Champions League idea is. And what it does is it takes the best of the best from different leagues around the European continent and puts them together. So Europe has so many teams, so many players, so many countries, and so many leagues that are all on equal footing with each other, or a little bit lesser so, that they take the best of the best and put them all in a tournament. And it's very similar to how the World Cup is set up. There's 32 teams, and they play in groups, and then they go to a round of 16, and it's a single elimination along that way, but it's the home and home single leg aspect. So you can, your first half basically becomes the first quarter, your first game becomes the first half, and then you play the second half on the opposing team's field.
So is it safe to say, to try to oversimplify it, is it safe to say that the qualifying format is similar to that of an NCAA tournament, where you have your conference champions and your at-large bids, and then the actual format of playing is obviously different, with group play and then the aggregates?
It's close. These leagues have a predetermined amount. So when you look at the EPL, the top four make it out. That's why when talking about Man U and Chelsea and Tottenham and everything at the very end of the season was such a big deal, because you wanted to automatically qualify for the Champions League, and not like, let's say, a second best tournament like the Europa League, which is also having its semifinals moving into the finals as we speak. That tournament's not as big of a deal. It's kind of like winning the NIT compared to the NCAA championship. So you want to be in that top one. And so you have extra things to fight for when you're in the table, because a lot of these Eastern European leagues, they don't have playoffs. It's a table. It's like the old school NASCAR format, where you just go to be the very, very best, and it all builds up throughout the season. Well, these extra little discussions keep making things interesting because we knew in the EPL, for example, it was going to be Liverpool or Man City pretty much since halfway through the season. Mm-hmm. It was really which two teams are going to make it out of that group from 3 to 6, which two were going to make it to the Champions League, which one was going to make it to the Europa League, and which one wasn't going to make a league at all. And all the different leagues have different amounts that they can get into. Some of them have their regular season champion is the only one that makes it in. Some have 2, some have 4. It really depends on how good the league is overall and what these teams have kind of done in the past. There's also an at-large bid for whichever team won the Europa League. They will automatically get in as well, which adds some extra dynamic to why that league is important.
So we're speaking here with Brice Burge of Public House Media's Own Your Soccer Passport here, talking Champions League final. So Liverpool advancing on aggregate after a 4-0 win over Barcelona, going into it obviously trailing 3-0. And then you have Tottenham on Wednesday, just an insane tear in the final few minutes, final half, obviously, of that game. And to be able to pull it together and to have the type of singular performance that they did from Morrow to be able to go ahead and advance here to the finals. What did you make of the match on Wednesday?
Well, this was a big one for 2 different reasons, because when we had Liverpool and Barcelona in that other semifinal, that was a very straightforward scenario. Mm-hmm. And then when you've got on this side Ajax or Ajax, depending on which language of origin you go with, they have a different setup because they're one of the only qualifiers from the Dutch league. So with that whole setup, that when you got into the knockout stages, there were only certain teams and only certain leagues that were really, really well defined. And Ajax was one of the outliers because they were the Dutch champion and nobody really expected them to go this far. They were kind of your Cinderella story. Mm-hmm. But instead of, and we talked about this on the show this week, instead of kind of being your Cinderella as like a Davidson or a Loyola Chicago or something like that, if you want to continue that that process, it's kind of like the Butler with when Gordon Hayward was there and everything. And they had a very solid defense. They had a team first mentality in offense that really was set and solid, and they jumped out to a 2-0 lead at halftime. And it wasn't until Mora kind of came in and just said, nope, I'm not letting this fly. And he showed why he was so important, because Tottenham preseason, they did nothing to improve their team. They just kind of like looked at it and go, now we're good. Yep. And they didn't bring in any major free agents. And it was one of the odd times. It was one of the few times in probably the last 15 years that one of your top flight programs in the EPL didn't bring in a major free agent signing. And so for them to come in here and say now they're in the Champions League final against a team that they've got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder to go up against because they lost the EPL title to them. And they've done it in this dramatic way because this is a last-minute shot. Mm-hmm. Like using that Butler comparison again, the only thing, imagine if he would have hit that.
Yep.
when they were in that national title game. That would have been the equivalency to tomorrow's 90+6 minute shot. It was basically the last play of the game. It will go down as one of the biggest goals in Champions League history, one of the biggest goals in Tottenham's history, to force that and move along. And just to clarify, they did tie on aggregate 3-3, but because this game was held at Ajax's stadium, that means that they've scored 3 goals on the road, and Ajax won the first game in Tottenham only by 1-0. So the first tiebreaker is goals that you score in the opposing house, and Tottenham won that matchup 3-1.
So now that we look at this with Liverpool and Tottenham, obviously 2 very well-known EPL teams, when you look at this matchup, what do you see, especially when you consider the fact that with it being a June 1st match, the potential for Harry Kane to actually be on the pitch?
Well, you got Harry Kane, but you got the other side too. Is will Mo Salah be back from his concussion, because those things can be long too. I look at this matchup. It's the first time since 2008 when Chelsea won it that it's been an all EPL Champions League final. And I look at these two teams kind of coming about, and whether or not Tottenham is going to sit back and stop and think, or if this is going to be an opportunity for Liverpool to truly show their dominance on the British Isles this year and say that they're the team. The two storylines moving into this, especially when you look at how Tottenham completely just botched this season. I mean, they should have been clear-cut the best, in my opinion, clear-cut fighting for that championship, if not an EPL championship team, and they found ways to lose, including important matchups against Liverpool earlier in the season. So when I look at this matchup and I see what Liverpool can do, especially if they are completely healthy, I think that they can really start working those outsides a lot better and kind of let the rest of the team follow in behind them and really establish some possession when getting into the attacking third. For Liverpool, even if they have Mo Salah back, I'm not sure how much they want to change about it, because it seemed to be pretty darn effective with him not there. And I mean that in all due respect to Mo Salah, who's well deserved to be named one of the best players in the world right now. But when you have what Liverpool did in terms of creating complete chaos on the pitch with the way that they brought forward their attack against Barcelona, it added something different that we hadn't seen from Liverpool this season yet, which is a united front. You put that striker up top where you can run your offense through them, then you don't necessarily have to worry about scoring. You can worry about your defense a little bit better. You can kind of shade players differently. You're on different parts of the pitch, and you're going to be setting up your format a lot differently. And now you take that player out. It's almost like when you remove your star wide receiver from a spread option and you kind of have to go down to a triple option. It's a completely different scenario for Liverpool, and I think that they're going to be able to use a little bit of both aspects going into these matchups to really kind of show a level that I didn't think that they had. But they proved me wrong in this really impressive victory against Barcelona. The other thing, too, about this is that Tottenham has a way to screw up, but Tottenham has a way to show up in big games. Mm-hmm. Liverpool's got some interesting situations where they've dropped a first leg and had to climb back. Both these teams have like a spit in your face aspect of the legs, and I'm not sure how that's going to play off when you have that kind of same storyline going into a game like this, because I'm not sure who wants to act like they're the underdog. Who wants to act like they're the ones with something to prove? You're not really sure, because both teams kind of have to get like smacked in the face a little bit before they're willing to bring that aspect of their gameplay up. And it's one of the biggest detractors from a game like this, because you could just have them both sitting back for the first 75 minutes and then just have the last 15 minutes be a free-for-all. That is totally within the realm of possibility here. And as a fan, I'm not as excited about this matchup as I feel like I should. I would have loved to see Ajax in there, or and typically I lean towards Spurs as like the good side of the EPL. I'm unfortunately a Newcastle United fan, so that never really ends up well. But you have this kind of setup. Ajax was a better story. Ajax, I think, had a more compelling team unity aspect that would have been really cool to see them up against Liverpool. And even if Liverpool wasn't there, Barcelona and what they had to offer with Suarez and Messi and all those guys would have been really fun to see against Tottenham, which is getting, the exact same deal, like just that same thing that we talked about before about the same team a second year in a row. How does that play up in a situation like this? Because it so rarely happens, and you're putting up against some of the best stars in all of soccer in Barcelona. So I think the storylines kind of go away, and it kind of leaves you with an interesting aspect of gameplay.
June 1st, 2019 in Madrid, Spain, first ever final for Tottenham in the UEFA Champions League, and for Liverpool, their second in a row after falling 3-1 last year to Real Madrid. Brice Burge of Public House Media's own Your Soccer Passport. Catch him there every single Wednesday. Brice, we appreciate it. It's going to be a fun one here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, should be good.
All right, it's Brice Burge of Your Soccer Passport. Always enjoy chatting with him. Do so a lot off the air, but it's always fun to get him back on the air and actually talk a little bit of Champions League soccer as well. When we come back, your listener questions will wrap up shop. You're on Press Row, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network.
Listen to every episode and get the latest shows sent right to you. Subscribe to Press Row on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, and Stitcher.com. Or visit us online at www.thephmedia.com. This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media. This is Press Row with Christian Heimel, a Public House Media podcast.
When it's time to party, we will party hard.
Close up shop here on Press Row. Christian Heimel here with you, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network. Big thanks to Brice Burge for joining us on the show there. As always, check out Your Soccer Passport. A lot of fun. Those guys are great, as they say, discussing club and country. And for those of you who your club is Liverpool like me, going to be an exciting time with the Champions League final. All right, let's get to some of your listener questions. We do this every single week on Twitter and Instagram at PressRowPHM. You could email the show, PressRowPHM@gmail.com, or you could find us on Facebook, Press Row Podcast Public House Media. First one comes from Keith in Illinois. Chicago White Sox's Tim Anderson keeps bat flipping and says that it brings fun to the game. Where do you stand on this unwritten rule in baseball? Look, I agree. One of the things that baseball has a big issue with is, realistically, they don't market to their younger fans. There's no way to really kind of market these players on a national level. One of the reasons why Odell Beckham is so big, Antonio Brown, Steph Curry, LeBron James are so big is because they're marketed nationally by their league, not just their team, but by their league as well. Baseball, you don't see the best young talent on national TV. You don't see them doing national endorsement deals. You see that all the time in football and in basketball. You don't see it a lot in baseball. The other part is I do think baseball is living in the past too much with some of these things. Don't get me wrong. There are certain times where bat flips are unnecessary. Like, for instance, Tim Anderson throwing it the way that he had a couple of weeks ago. Little ridiculous, and he got hit in the back, of course, which then led into a big melee. I'm fine with bat flips. I mean, Brett Boone used to do it all the time. Sammy Sosa used to have a little hop. Dante Bichette used to shoot his fingers as if they were air guns. They do it. It's a personality move, and I'm fine with it. I get it. I understand. But at the same time, it's one of those things that realistically, was it worth it for you? Like when a guy celebrates a dunk, that's your job. You're a 7-footer. You're able to dunk. If Tim Anderson's job is to hit home runs, unless it's in a big moment, you don't need to be doing it. So I get it, but at the same time, I don't. Like, it bothers me so much. Jose Bautista's against the Rangers in the playoffs a few years ago really bothered me because I thought it was a little over the top. That being said, that's a situation where it deserves a bat flip. It deserves that kind of emotion. But on April 17th, in a game like against Kansas City, what does that mean? That means nothing. So pick your spots here. You're a young kid. I get it. You got a lot of passion. You're excited. And it brings some fun to the game, but also at the same time, dude, pump the brakes a little bit. You're playing for the Chicago White Sox, for crying out loud. All right, let's see here. Max in New York City, is anybody going to be able to realistically beat Golden State this year, or are they able to flip a switch and just look? Everybody asks this every single year. And honestly, I think there are two teams that can beat Golden State. Number one is Houston, who they're in a very good battle with right now, a very good battle with. But the team that I'm really intrigued by, and I wouldn't have said this at the beginning of the year, the Toronto Raptors. The way that they're absolutely dominating teams throughout is really, really impressive, just to kind of see how this is going through and making things that much more exciting for the NBA. They're just absolutely lambasting Philadelphia, and I think the way Kawhi Leonard is going, closing in on 40 points, 15 rebounds almost every single game, they're blowing these guys out. They got a Game 6 tonight where Philadelphia can close it out. It's a lot of fun. We'll see how it all goes, though, but I do think that those two teams, Houston and then Toronto, could very easily be those two teams that end up knocking off Golden State. And then finally, last one here, Matt in Texas, UFC 237 coming up this weekend. Which fight are you most excited for? I'll be honest, I don't really know. This isn't a dynamite card. Don't get me wrong. I love Thug Rose is going to be a lot of fun to watch, but she's pretty dominant. I expect her to kind of win this one against Jessica Andrade pretty easily. You got Anderson Silva, you got Jose Aldo, you got Thiago Alves. There's some star power on this card, but there's nothing that really makes me jump out. I think the one that might be most intriguing to me is you look at almost the battle of the old guard in the prelims, Clay Guida against BJ Penn. That could be a lot of fun, especially when you consider the fact that how talented both of these guys at one point in their careers used to be. But you got Anderson Silva, who in the co-main event is not the Anderson Silva that we thought. Jared Cannonier is going to be really tough for him. Jose Aldo, not who he used to be, but still very dominant. And Jose Aldo I'm almost kind of rooting for, because you're looking for that featherweight division to see exactly what it could end up being with a number of these fighters, just to see how it could really go through. And it's almost a little disturbing to kind of figure out how everything goes. But the featherweight division is going to be quite interesting, especially when you look at a guy like Aldo, who has been the dominant force there, for so long at one point in his career. So I'll be really interested to see how this all plays out. But there's really not much that I'm dying to see. I love to see Aldo against Max Holloway at some point. That would be great. Maybe to see Frankie Edgar at some point. But again, it's just interesting to see how this all could end up going down at UFC 237. But you got guys who aren't who they used to be. The only one that's really worth watching, I really do think, is Thug Rose, because, well, she's Thug Rose, and that's going to be the exciting part about watching UFC 237 coming up this weekend. Big thanks to everybody involved in the show. Of course, huge thanks to Brice Burge, our very own of Public House Media, for joining the program. We really appreciate his time, as always, in the Champions League final. Like I said at the top of the show, guys, watch the NHL playoffs. It's so exciting. You have no idea how much fun it is. If you haven't been watching, if your team's not in it, it doesn't matter. It's the greatest postseason ever. It's every single year as phenomenal as you can ever hope it to be. Don't forget, you can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts as well, Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, iHeartRadio, and of course, PublicHouseMedia.org. Social media as well, Twitter and Instagram at PressRowPHM. Email the show, PressRowPHM@gmail.com, or find us on Facebook, Press Row Podcast by Public House Media. Until next week, I'm Christian Heimel. I'll see you guys on Press Row.